Mr. President, I want to thank the senator from California for very clearly outlining for all of us to hear why this was not a search for truth on an issue that affects so many people in this country, the victims of sexual assault, who often, as she just described, do not talk about it, do not speak about it, do not ever tell anyone until there is a reason to, which is what Dr. Ford did. And while the senator from California is there, you said this was not a search for truth. When it comes to victims of sexual assault, and you've dealt with them time and time again as district attorney and attorney general in the state of California, what message does this send when they see the United States Senate?
Senator Murray, I will tell you that my great pain, and you and I have talked about it, we've all talked about it, part of the pain of this process is a real concern that sexual assault victims and survivors may take away from this process, that their stories won't be heard or believed. Part of the pain that I'm taking away from this process is those that have a story to tell or might have been prepared to have the courage to report may decide, look what happened to Dr. Ford. It doesn't matter. No one will believe me, and why should I go through that? And so I have to say this, and you and I have discussed it, Senator Blumenthal, we've discussed it together. Part of what we must message, even if our Republican colleagues will not, is to all of the women and men out there who have experienced this. We will hear you, we will see you, we will respect you, we will give you dignity. Speak your truth. Do not be afraid. Do not let this system or any aspect of it bully you into silence. It is critical that we talk about this issue. I believe this is an issue right now that is where the issue of domestic violence was about 30 years ago. There was a perception about domestic violence that I hope we have gotten beyond, but there was a perception about domestic violence, oh, you know, what happens in the king's castle is the king's business. That's private business. That's not our business. But then we evolved as a society and we realized, no, if she's walking around with a black eye or a busted lip, that's everybody's business. She deserves to be safe, and we must stand up for her. I believe this is an inflection moment on the issue of sexual assault, and I hope and I pray that this is a moment where everyone will agree no one should silently suffer. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the facts that every 98 seconds in the United States of America, someone is sexually assaulted. Let's talk about the fact that 63% of sexual assaults are not reported to the police. Let's talk about the fact that since Dr. Ford had the courage to speak out, one of the biggest national organizations that addresses sexual assault saw a 738% increase in the calls they received from survivors of these cases.
I think the senator from California, and I so agree. And this is one of my biggest fears about this moment, and let me talk about why that is true. I was just a mom at home in 1991. I was a state senator, but really not interested in what was happening here at all. My interest came because I watched the Clarence Thomas Hill hearings. And I watched how a woman shared a very difficult story with an all-male panel of the Judiciary Committee at the time. And she was disbelieved, she was swept aside, she was treated as if her voice wasn't important, and she was not believed. I was so angry as a woman because, like so many women in this country, I knew of so many people with experiences much like hers, who too at work at that time had been dismissed, not believed, were afraid to speak up. And I was angry. And I went to a gathering that night and I told some of my friends back in 1991, the night of the hearing, I'm gonna have to run for the US Senate because I need to be inside that to speak up for these women. That's what motivated me to run. I was not given one chance of winning that Senate race. Here I am today, 27 years later. Why? because so many women and men who understood shared that experience and knew that voice needed to be here. That's what brought me here to the United States Senate. So let me talk about Dr. Ford, because I listened to her like everyone else did. And I heard her voice, and it rang so true to me. I watched her with tears in my eyes because she was honest, she was sincere, she was persuasive, she was credible. She had no reason to lie, none. In fact, I think we should remember she did not want to come forward initially. She was worried about the attacks that would come. She knew the history, as every one of us do, what happens to those courageous voices when they speak up, the invasion of privacy that they have. She knew what it would mean for her family. She only came forward when Judge Kavanaugh was on the very short list for the Supreme Court before he was ever sent to us. She came forward, she spoke out, but no one called her. And she didn't want to do it publicly. She didn't want to have this become what she was known for in her life. But she did. And if it wasn't for her, we would not be at this point. Now, Judge Kavanaugh was selected, and only then was Dr. Ford able to get her information to the people who would pay attention, and she insisted that it be kept confidential, to none of our surprise. She didn't want a spectacle, she didn't want a show. Why did she do that? She felt it was her civic duty that we as United States senators who were giving essentially a job interview to a man who wanted a position on the highest court of the land, who would be judging people in front of him, we should know what his character was. Her story was compelling. She took a polygraph test. She did everything right. She had told people before. She presented her case credibly. And now it is extremely disconcerting to me, as someone who watched the Clarence Thomas Hill hearings and is sitting here, that I have heard people dismiss her, put her down, all the way up to the President of the United States. What message does that send across the country today to other women who are so bravely now telling their stories so it will not happen to anyone else? What does it say to them? What does it say to young girls in high school and college today? They're going to get away with it, so be quiet, because it'll only ruin your life, not theirs. What message does it say to young men? I have heard my colleagues say, well, it was high school, it was college. Really? Is that what we want young boys in high school today to think, that it's okay? Don't worry, whatever you do in high school does not count. Whatever you do in college doesn't count. I do not want my grandson to hear that message. I do not want my granddaughters to hear that message. I want my country to be better than that. Dr. Ford is a real person. She is not alone. And if any senator here in the United States Senate is listening, they will hear voices in their own states, from places they knew, from their own relatives, from friends they have not ever known about, bravely come forward because Dr. Ford did. This Senate, with the action that we are pursuing, could quash those voices forever. Now, to my friends out there and to everyone who has a story, do not be silent. That is not how we win this for the future. But know that we do believe you. The Senate has changed since then. I was proud of the Judiciary Committee members on our side, because unlike when I watched the Senate in 1991, there were women and men there who were listening, and they are today. But we have to, in this Senate, think about the consequence of this vote to so many people who are listening today and asking, do I say anything or do I let it happen? And I would just urge my colleagues to remember the lesson of 1991, where too many people felt, I can't speak out. We're changing, we're growing, we're speaking out. And it's so imperative that this Senate stand behind those women. We hear you, we believe you, we know that that happened to you, and you need to tell your story, and you need to have the courage, and we'll be behind you. But I would say to the senators who are joining me today, both who have been involved in these cases, that I am concerned that this message could be the wrong one for young men and women who are coming behind us. And we have to stand up for them. And I would yield to the senator from Connecticut.